And often with something like this, where there's so much going on, you don't need to do anything very complex. So I decided just to do a straight stitch on the side of the vases where perhaps the light would be shining. And in a painting, you might paint that or highlight that in a different way. But I thought I would just simply highlight it using my cream pearl cotton that I use so much of and I've nearly run out of. And it was just right. And one of the tips that I've shared in some of my tutorials about stitching on paper is you can reinforce the back, especially where you end and begin a line of stitching. Here I've just used paper and a glue stick. Sometimes I use double-sided tape and cover the whole line of stitching if the paper is a bit more fragile, but this is thin card, so it's pretty robust. And I've done all four in a similar way, not always the same number of stitches. I just went with the flow. And I have a little homemade awl type of thing that I made with a cork and a needle, because that does some nice fine holes for when you want to stitch something that's not too thick. So I've called these vases 4, 5, 6 and 7. And as you can see, they're all slightly different because of the way I've jelly printed them with the different colours, different stencils and so on. To me, that looks a bit like camouflage, but also reminds me of my woodland series and my wetland series of stitched and collaged books that I made, where I talked about the birds becoming extinct and I outlined their shapes in white to represent the fact that they might just be a memory. And I think this kind of connects to that, although it wasn't a conscious thing. They're hiding behind the foliage. That's how it looks to me anyway. But since then, I've added some stitching, just some simple stitching to highlight the bird shape and some of the foliage. I didn't want to obscure the textures and colours on the gel prints too much, so I kept it really simple. And you can see that the birds are still not too prominent. Many birds are becoming extinct and some of them are only a memory now. So they're kind of like a ghostly image or just an indistinct image. I highlighted the fern here with just a few stitches. I didn't want to do too much, just enough to give it some definition. And then this was the third one. So the next thing I'm going to do is to demonstrate the stitching using these two prints. Because they have a bit more contrast, I think it will be easier for you to see the stitching and the methods that I use when I demonstrate it if we've got slightly clearer shapes and designs. And one of the things that we'll do also is to look at how your actual artwork or gel print, if that's what you use, can inspire the stitching rather than imposing a certain stitching idea onto the artwork without regarding what it looks like. First of all, what you will need, of course, is some scissors. You will need a needle to fit the thread that you're going to use, and you'll need some thread. I've decided to use a pearl cotton that's not too thick. I think this is an 8. The other thing I mentioned when I talked about the vases pieces was using little patches on the back for when you start and stop the stitching, just to reinforce it. So I have some of those ready. That's just normal scraps of printer paper. You will need some glue. I use a glue stick. I think this one in particular is very good. There are other brands also that are very good. The cheaper brands don't seem to hold as well, so it is worth it buying something that you know will work. You will also need something to puncture your holes. This is a little oar that I made using a wine cork. I made a hole in it, put the eye end of a darning needle in the hole with some glue, and when it was dry, it was very, very firm and strong. And then I got another cork to put on top so that when it's in my box of tools, it won't damage me when I rummage for it. If you're using a thicker thread or maybe even yarn, you might need a thicker awl. This is one that I often use for bookbinding. You can get them thicker than this as well, but I tend to use one that's not too thick for my bookbinding. So just go with what suits the type of thread that you're using. In my other bird pieces, I use the outline of the bird to inspire the stitching. So this is what I call responding to the artwork. I didn't want it to be too prominent, but I wanted it still to be visible. And the same with the foliage. And I respected that thought in each of these gel prints. Here it's a little bit more obvious because the background is less patterned. But with the fern, again, I just respected the fern print and only highlighted it in a few places. Have a look at the artwork you've chosen to do. If you want to try it on one of these, I do have downloads that you can buy at gonerustic.com in the art and decor section. And you can download them in 2 different resolution qualities. One is high resolution and one is medium resolution. So that's totally up to you. If you would prefer to use your own artwork, that's wonderful. But sometimes if you're unsure, it can be helpful to do something that's fairly simple to start with. I thought I would start by making holes in this dark line just here for my stitching. I'm not making small stitches because if you do stitches that are too small, the stitching will be too close together and it'll be very easy for the whole thing to come apart on that line of holes. So I usually do this in advance. And when I come to the other end, I leave a little bit of it not punched with holes because I want to make sure that I finish by going through to the back. And I won't know that till I get to about this area here. So I won't punch right to the end at the moment, but I can continue all around here till about there. To start stitching, I have my needle threaded and I have my thread knotted at the end with a knot that's big enough not to pull through my hole. And I'm starting from the back for this particular exercise, but sometimes I do start from the front if I want to leave a tail hanging for texture or to add an embellishment. Now, for some reason, that has torn and it's moved up from the hole that I made. So this is a good opportunity to show you how I fix tears in the paper. This gel print is done on printer paper, and while that's reasonably robust, it doesn't take much to tear it. So I'll just put some glue on it with a bit of paper, and that will hold it. And I'm pretty generous with the glue also. And I'll just put it there where the tear is, but not covering up the other holes that I need to use. And I press it down really firmly. And if there's any edge that's not glued down, I'll just lift it and add a bit more of the glue. So let's try again. And then we'll go from the front to the back. And this is why it's so good to do your holes in advance, because it would be very hard to know where to put your needle if you didn't have that next hole there. And you just go in and out, a simple running stitch, not too close together. And you do that along the whole line that you've punched ready. And even now you can see that it is highlighting that lovely sweeping curve of the bird's wing. So you do have to flip it back and forth to be able to sew through paper. If you're sewing through cloth, you can often just run your needle in and out for several stitches, but really with paper you can't do that because there's more risk that you'll tear it. So it's best just to take your time, put some lovely music on, which is what I do, or a podcast or an audio book, and enjoy the process. Some of my works that I showed you at the beginning of this tutorial have quite complex stitching on them, especially the collages, and I'll probably use quite a few different colours of threads as well. But this particular gel print has quite a lot of texture in it, and I didn't want to obscure it. I actually just want to complement it. So I'm using just very simple stitches and one colour of thread. The artwork that you're working on will tell you what it needs. You just need to be observant and not rush into things too much. You might need time to think about it for a little while. I actually thought about how to stitch these bird prints for about a week before I started on them. And that way I thought I would just give myself time until I was quite sure how I would like to respond to what's already there. So I'll just finish stitching that particular line, and then I'll show you how I'm going to finish off. I've now come near to the end of my stitching, and what I've done is I've worked out how many holes I need to do to make sure I end up on the back of the artwork. So I've come out here, I'll go in there, out, in, and there's still room to do another one if I needed it, but I didn't need it, and it's not too big a gap to be noticeable. So I'll just finish that off, and then we'll end it with a knot, and I'll show you how I do that. Again, not pulling too tight, because you don't want to tear the paper like I did at the beginning. So this is the last stitch, and I turn it over. And what I usually do is I make a kind of a French knot. So I just wrap my thread around twice, hold it with my thumb, but not too tight, so that it stays in place while I pull the thread through. And I use my fingernail to make sure it's really close to the paper. If it's not, you can still make it sit right with the little patch that you're going to put on, so it's not really an issue. So we'll just get one of these little bits of paper. Make sure I've only got one. Be generous with the glue. And put that on top of the knot, making sure it's really well stuck down. And I have another start and end here, or end and start here, so I'm going to put another one there. And none of this is visible from the front, of course, but you know that it's been reinforced and the thread is not going to pull out, not unless you're really mistreated, of course. So, and this one I've noticed it's just coming up a little bit on the side, so I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to that just to make sure that's firmly fixed. That was where I had the tear, so I'm going to put another one on the knot. Just make sure it's firmly attached. The next thing that I want to do is this part here. If you look at one of the other ones that I did with the fern on it, you can see that I've just done a stitch every now and again where there's a fern frond. And where there's the bird shape, I didn't do the fern. You could, of course, go in front of the bird with the stitching, but to me, I just felt like I wanted that to continue there. And it kind of blurs the difference between the foreground and the background, which I quite like. And then I just kept going until I got to the bottom. So what I did with this, instead of doing the holes in advance, I did it as I went along. Just put a knot on the end of my thread. And I probably will run out of thread for this. So it's not very distinct, so hopefully you can see this. I can see it enough to start some stitches. So I might start there. I'm just going to put 2 holes there. And then I'll move a bit further down before I do another one. And I won't do necessarily the whole fern frond. I might just do part of it. For example, just the end and a little bit past halfway. So I'll go through from the back. And that's one frond done. Of course, if I didn't want this to be so noticeable, I could have used a darker colour, but I just wanted to keep it simple and have the same colour as for the bird. I might do the next one down here, and you can just see the fern line there. So that's the outer edge of the fern frond, and I want to come in towards the stem section, so I'm not too far away for the next one. Now I could do another one here before I go to this side, but I think I will go to this side, and I might do it here, a bit further down on the frond this time. So then I will go to that hole, and you'll just know with your artwork how you need to organise it, where you come in and where you come out. So there we go, we're starting to get a little bit of definition for the fern. Here I'm going to do another one near it. So I'll just do the holes. And as I said, you can do this with the awl or with your needle, depending on the thickness of your paper. So I'll just continue that, and when we come to the end, I'll show you again how I'm going to end it. I've done my knot, and you can see it's a little bit away from the paper. So I'll just cut it there, and then when I patch it, I'll make sure that I pull the thread a little bit to make it so it will be flat on the other side. So just make sure that it's taut but not so tight that it tears. Put my little patch on it. And I ended there because my thread was getting short and there's some quite big jumps in between the stitches here. Now I need to make a decision, and again this is about responding to your artwork. In a couple of my other bird gel prints, there was quite a big space in the wing area, and so I just did a few stitches to hint at the wing feathers. But this one, I've got a choice. I can do a few stitches to hint at the wing feathers, or I continue the fern stitching. And I think what I'll do is I'll continue the fern stitching. The other thing is I have some other foliage here, which is some leaves from a lomandra plant which grows near our home. But I'm going to leave those. I'm not going to worry about them because I don't want to overwhelm the textures and shades of colour and so on with the stitching. So I think my decision is just to do some of these fern fronds, and then that will be the finish. Once I've done this, I'll show it to you, and hopefully that will give you enough information to have a go yourself. Just to recap, we've done a similar kind of stitching for each of these bird prints. Of course, you might only be doing a one-off, but I just wanted to also show you how you can make a series which are similar but not the same, still tie in together with your stitching. So we've outlined around the bird here and highlighted some of the foliage. This one had different foliage and it had 2 birds, but still using the same techniques, just a running stitch and some straight stitches for the fern. This one is similar to the first one, where I've done the bird outline and then just a few stitches for the foliage. And this is the one that we did together. So you can see the fern is all finished, just enough to show you that it is a fern, but you can still see the shadows in the background of the actual botanical print that I put on this gel print. And when I turn it over, you'll see that it has quite a few patches on it, particularly here, because I had a tear there, so I patched that. Then I patched the knot at the end of the stitching, and then this stitching started here, so I did another patch there. And that way I'm sure that it's going to be robust. There's another one that I forgot to do, so I will do that off camera. So this one I will do in a very similar way to the one I've just shown you, except we have two sorts of foliage here. We have this particular one, which I think is Lomandra, and we have the fern. My feeling is that I'll probably do the Lomandra and leave the fern, and then I'll do my outlines in these gaps here because there are two birds. And in that way, it won't be the same, but it will be similar to the previous one and all the other ones. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it gives you the courage to stitch on paper. It is a very enjoyable process. I do love stitching on paper, and a lot of my work involves that. And this might open up a whole new world for you. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial.